Why women are always victims in any riots and wars? In reference to heinous crime against women during recent clashes at Manipur between Meiteis and Kukis communities, Himanshi Dhawan writes in Times of India newspaper dated 9 August 2023 under heading, "Cheapest weapon count a man, deployed in Manipur too." And I quote, "It is nearly a month since the video of 2 Manipuri women sexually assaulted and paraded naked went viral. The brutality happened on May 4th. But the state and center stepped in only after a public uproar over the video on July 19th. This week the Supreme Court that had earlier described the situation as horrendous and of unprecedented magnitude appointed former Mumbai Police Commissioner Dattatreya Padsaljakar to monitor the CBI probe on incidents of sexual violence. It also set up a panel of 3 former High Court judges headed by former Jank HC Chief Justice Geeta Mittal to look into relief and rehabilitation. Though the Apex Court has taken note, Manipur continues to burn. At last count the state administration said there were 6,523 criminal incidents that had occurred. Since the first incident of sexual assault, multiple accounts of gang rape, gender violence and murder have come to light. In India, rape survivors of the 1984 pogrom continue to live in oblivion even though the martyrs are mourned and books and films have been written so history is not forgotten. But so very often, it is. You won't find these women's names in history books or on war memorials. We try our best to obliterate the women whose bodies have been used to symbolize abject humiliation of a community and its people. Only sometimes there are heroes amongst us who rise above their pain to speak for what has happened only so that it should not be repeated. The most vocal voice among the 2002 Gujarat riot survivors remains the soft-spoken Bilkis Bano Rasool. When this writer met Bilkis in April 2019, the Supreme Court had awarded her a compensation of 50 lakh. Somehow the money and a government job were supposed to heal the wounds inflicted 17 years ago when she was gang raped and forced to bear witness as her 3-year-old child was brutally killed in front of her eyes. The world had moved on from the riots, but having lost 14 members of her family and changed over 20 homes, her past would not leave her. She is back in court again challenging the remission granted to 11 convicts in her case. In the 2019 interview she had said, "John K. Badal mine, John Nai Chahiye. Badla Nai Insaf Chahiye we didn't want revenge. We wanted justice. But Insaf proves elusive if you're a woman. For the genocide of Yazidi women, an estimated 7,000 of them were abducted, enslaved and raped. A German court has managed to convict a mere 3 people so far. In Nigeria many of those guilty of being part of Boko Haram roam free. Bilkis continues to bear the impossible burden of speaking for those who could not. But must we repeat that mistake with Manipur? For the women who have been pulled out of their homes and hostels, humiliated and assaulted, is it not our responsibility to stand up against such horror? Is it not time that the systematic disrobing of rights is, at the very least, called out? As Yazidi human rights activist Nadia Murad, who was sold to slavery and abused several times, says, "I want to be the last girl in the world with a story like mine." But situation is in front of you even today when a 14-year-old victim was burnt alive in Rajasthan after heinous crime against her. So this concern of Gpif is quite relevant. Few reasons. They are weak physically and easy to cheat them emotionally. Difficult to trace man in devil mind and psychology. Media, movies, serials and dressing sense. Drug and most important immorality rampant, and morality never considered the urgency by policy-making politicians, neither it has been their agenda. Civilization is at its lowest level for lack of morality. Poverty and luxury are both reasons for crime. You can judge man mentality with one psychology across. There is no issue when a married man marry again after divorce, but how difficult for a divorced woman to marry again? Anandamarga addresses in Karyakarya 3. Marriage ceremony. 7th point being patriarchal society exists today, the responsibility of men are more towards society. A widow or a woman forsaken by her husband can remarry. A man marrying such a woman will be given a special status in the society. He will have to shoulder the responsibility of bringing up the children by her previous husband. Men can prove their manliness by marrying shelterless women. Do not at all allow a woman to live in neglect. Moral education and universalism to be taught from childhood across the world, right from kindergarten schools from formative age. There should be equity in social and economical sphere. Today economically weak can't dare to talk against wealthy as he can't fight in court, and culturally we succumb to social pressure and our upbringing. There is lacuna in our upbringing and sexual disparity. Right from olden days the story goes as king defeated and marry their daughter to show them down morally. Kshatriya age, the Shudras had fought solely to survive, whereas the Kshatriyas fought for their own survival, for the survival of others and for their prestige. The Shudras' main aim had been to arrange food and security by any means, whereas the Kshatriyas' aim was to conquer with glory. This sentiment enabled the Kshatriyas to develop a subtler intellect and awaken their conscience and discriminative judgment. It went against the Kshatriyas' conscience to kill the unarmed, to kill women, children or old people, to kill those who had surrendered, or to kill a retreating enemy. In a word, the Kshatriyas' sense of valor transcended the animal level, and they learned to understand the value of human beings. The rise of patriarchy. It was to a large extent this sense of value that elevated conjugal and domestic life to the human level. Conjugal relations came not to be limited to the enjoyer and enjoyed level but to include a sense of duty. As conjugal relations developed, a father's sense of duty towards his children also awakened. This led to a reduction in the mother's responsibilities to some extent, and as a consequence women became partially dependent on men for their food and clothes, particularly during pregnancy and immediately after childbirth. As a result, although couples belonged to the same group, they began to form into families headed by men. Because families were headed by men, the groups also became male-dominated and the matriarchs lost the power they had previously enjoyed. Tantra and Indo-Aryan civilization. With the exception of a few Munisanrasis, the militant, Kshatriya-predominant, Aryans used to view the world with an extroversial outlook. After major battles they would kill the men of the conquered community, employ their children as servants, and either marry the women or employ them as maidservants. For that reason there was a large number of male and female slaves in their society. The custom of addressing all women as mother. The iron bangles of the women, the vermilion mark in the parting of their hair, the various marriage customs and rites, etc., are all different social practices borrowed from the non-Aryans. The custom of addressing all women as mother, Majima, Pima, Kakima, aunts, Didima, grandmother, etc., bears the mark of tantric influence, because in Tantra the social dominance of women was widely accepted. Even the little non-tantric or patrilineal influence that exists in the upper castes of Bengali society is not borrowed from the Aryans of northern India, but is a result of the close and intimate transoceanic relations that Bengal had in those days with regions outside India. Social aspects of women. What sort of treatment have women received so far? It is very true that women have gradually lost their rights or freedom in certain cases due to lack of competence. There are those who think that, because of this, special abilities are the only criteria for having rights. Such people, however, actually want women to be wageless slaves under the strict supervision of men. But is it merely due to their lack of competence that women have lost their rights? Have not the overflowing sentiments of their hearts also been partly responsible? Have not women, swayed by their emotions, ignored their own petty interests and gradually given everything, even the high social status that fascinates them, to their husbands, sons and brothers? Is it not reasonable to expect human beings, certainly human beings are not animals, to pay proper respect to such humility and large-heartedness? If a guest arrives unexpectedly, who volunteers to forego a meal to feed the guest? Who deprives herself first when a delicious dish is prepared? Who leaves home to keep house for others, giving up her paternal property rights, regardless of what the law says? Are not these observations applicable throughout most of the world? I do not say that men are ordinary human beings and that women are angels. I have only focused on women as human beings and mentioned their special qualities. Does a husband, when his wife is ill, nurse her with as much care as she nurses him when he is ill? Man has to behave responsible. Injustice in society is discrimination of sex. Instances of one sex of humanity being considered inferior to the other are very common. Women in a considerable area of the world are considered as the private property of men, meant for their pleasure only. As in most other living species, in the human society females are physically weaker than males. Nevertheless, their value in society is not a bit less than that of men. Selfish men, however, have exploited feminine weakness to the limit. Although they publicly declare women to be a community of mothers, they have actually relegated them to the level of domesticated cattle and sheep. In every sphere of life, these men have either substantially curtailed women's rights, or have kept them wholly subservient to men's whims and caprices. If half the society is steeped in inertia and prejudice, the other half will undoubtedly find the journey tough going, since it must carry this beast of burden along. In individual life, purity is equally necessary for both men and women, and for that, real spiritual vision is needed. But this is impossible as long as injustice to either of the two sexes exists. Solutions. Though millions years ago, yet human society is not formed in true sense of the term society. 1. Education. Base having moral education, neo-humanism attitude and responsibility, social education where addressing each other as brothers and sisters, makes difference. 2. No disparity and full growth of each personality. 3. Equal economic power and participation in social leadership, no dominance. 4. No ism but universalism is accepted in life. 5. Human goal of life is to become divine. 6. Strict social laws based on yama niyama and neo-humanism so that no one can exploit each other. A. Spiritual practices for purity and magnanimity of mind and for achieving ultimate desideratum. Always remember this fact that women are 50% of human civilization. There is no chance for the welfare of the world unless the condition of women is improved. It is not possible for a bird to fly with one wing. Practice for mental purity. The intelligent do not allow their mental purity to be stained even for a moment. To cleanse the mental sphere, force must be applied to remove the impurities, internal or external. This application of force must be a special type of action. When the impurity of selfishness enters every cavity of the mind and makes life a heavy burden, it has to be burned and melted in the fire of spiritual practices. Such a practice is just the reverse of meanness and selfishness. It is the effort to remove any impurities, any black spots from the mind. A feeling of selflessness, of universalism is the only remedy for cleansing mental impurity. Those who are fascinated or tempted by an object can gradually rid themselves of the mental pollution arising from their selfish motives by adopting just the reverse course. Therefore, only selfless service to humanity and efforts to look upon the world with a cosmic outlook can establish one in mental purity. In society, on one hand we see a crowd of antisocial elements, and on the other hand, a sense of frustration among the moralists. These moralists have therefore developed a tendency to go out of the society. With more wealth and strength, the antisocial elements are in the advantageous position, the moralists appear to be the culprits. This state of affairs is neither desirable nor proper and should not be allowed to continue any longer. Your duty will be to unite the moralists. Let there be two camps. Let there be an open fight. The moralists were so long scattered, and hence they could not fight. The united strength of 5 moralists is much more than the united strength of 100 immoralists because there is an unholy alliance between the latter. Meditation within closed doors will not do. Gather strength by intuitional practices and unite yourselves against the immoralists. Psychoeconomic exploitation. If a flying bird is caged for long, it loses its ability to fly. If the door of its cage is unfastened accidentally, it thinks, "What benefit will I derive flying in the distant blue sky? Let me pick up seeds, sitting on the perch of my little cage." Now, if people have been educated in a distorted manner and their minds crippled, they are unable to stand independently. If their minds have been molded by propaganda for a long period, they cannot utilize the opportunity for freedom, even if it is presented to them. Common people have been taught for ages that they belong to a low caste or class. Even if you offer these downtrodden people a chair to sit by you, they would murmur, "No sir, I am all right, let me sit on the ground." That is to say, their minds cannot function properly, just as a bird's wings become totally inactive in a cage. People have been accustomed to such repressions for thousands of years. The exploiters have injected fear complex in their minds to control them. That is the case of the most women today. The one who exploits the masses is also a person. This must never be lost sight of even for a moment. The human family is a conglomerate of different elements of the human race. Reforming and guarding against human frailties with a liberal and tolerant outlook, we have to proceed together towards the path of benevolence. So your duty is threefold. Your first duty is to observe morality and do intuitional practices. Without this you cannot have mental determination. Your next duty is to unite the moralists of the world, otherwise righteousness, dharma, will not endure. This will be your real duty. You will become great by this, for ideation of the great makes one great. At the third stage, you will have to mercilessly fight against sin wherever it has habitated this world. You will have to propagate this mission from door to door. You must have a flaming moral purpose so that greed, oppression and exploitation shrivel before the fire in you.